Hey guys, I'm here with another book review. Last week I read Solar by Ian McEwan because I'd heard many great things about Ian McEwan. And I did read Atonement in high school, but I don't really remember it well enough to say anything other than I thought it was okay, but it wasn't really my kind of thing. But it was a good story, I believe. I might have to reread that at some point in the future, but Ian McEwan has about 8 books on my list of 1001 books to read before you die. So, when I was at the library, I thought, hey, let's grab a random Ian McEwan book. I somehow managed to pick one that was not on that list, but that's okay. I read it anyway. And this is one of the books that makes me regret the fact that I don't vet my reads. A lot of people I know check reviews and ratings on Goodreads and stuff to make sure the books they read are good. And I don't like to do that because I prefer to go into books untainted. Because I feel like when I read reviews, if I read a bunch of good reviews for a book and I don't like it, then I feel like I should like it. And I make excuses for why I don't. Like, oh, well, I'm not in the mood. I'm not feeling like this. Like, it's really good. I just don't get it. And if I read bad reviews about it, I'll immediately going in thinking this isn't a very good book. I'm not going to like this very much. And it skews my opinion. So I like to go in fairly untainted. And I regret that for this book. Because if I checked the reviews on Goodreads, and 6 of the top 8 reviews either gave this book 1 or 2 stars. And I feel like people on Goodreads are usually rather generous with their ratings. So, that should tell you something about this lovely book. This book follows the life of a Nobel Prize winning physicist who basically, he won the Nobel Prize, and since then he has done nothing except kind of skate by on his former fame and the one important thing he did in his life. And throughout this book, he lies, cheats, and steals his way through everything and has no remorse. And basically just says, everyone else is doing it too, so it's fine. He is thoroughly unlikable in every way. He's just an awful person. But he's not evil. This was the book's major problem. I can't even, describe what this book is about, because it is just about him. It follows his life. There's no real plot. Certain things happen. He goes through a divorce with his wife in part 1, which is in the year 2000. He goes through a divorce with her, and she never pops up again, and, that was, a major thing that happened. And then in part 2, he's dating some other woman. This is in 2005, and she gets pregnant. And in part 3, he has a kid, and he's doing some other research and with solar energy in America, in Texas, and nothing really seemed to relate. It was just following his life. It was very character driven, which I do enjoy character driven books. But when there's no plot, I have to be invested in the characters. And he was an awful human being in all of the most boring ways possible. He was lazy. He was intelligent but did nothing with his intelligence and preferred to just not think. He was sexist. I think he was racist, but I don't remember that so well. But there was this whole big thing about his sexism and how how science doesn't appeal to women, and that was his belief, which was fun to read. And he was just boring and awful and excused it by saying, well, everyone else is awful too, so it's fine. It's no, bro. You're the only one who's awful here. And that was basically this entire book. I kept waiting for the plot to begin, and then about 150 pages in, and mind you, this is not a long book, it's about 300 pages. 150 pages in, I kind of realized the plot that I was waiting for was never going to happen. And it was just a struggle to slog through this. I did not care about him. There was no plot for me to get invested in. I was just kind of vaguely hoping that he was going to die in the end. But not really, because I didn't hate him that much. He was just annoying and unlikable, and I just felt like, oh, he would kind of vaguely deserve to die, but I don't really care enough to really hope it's gonna happen. I can't comment on Ian McEwan's writing so much for all his books, but for this, it felt like he was telling me a lot of things instead of like, showing versus telling. I felt like I was being told things instead of like experiencing what Michael Beard was going through. I don't know if that's just a writing style I don't appreciate so much, or if it was different in this book than his other books, but I would like to read more of his books to see, just because it was a very odd way of writing that I don't quite know how to describe. I didn't really understand the timeline or the pacing. Like, they'd be going along, and it'd be 10 or 15 pages later, and then they'd reference something that happened, a couple of chapters back, and be like, oh yeah, all those months ago. And I'd be like, what? I thought that was, last week. I could never understand where it was supposed to be in, like, how time was passing. I always felt lost until they would reference something like that, and it would be nowhere near what I expected. Like, he introduced his wife to one of his coworkers once, and then later he found out they were sleeping together, and he was like, well, has it been for the whole year and a half that you've known her? And I remember thinking, what? Like, that was a year and a half ago? Like, it was 20 pages. Like, how does this time pass? Like, I feel like there should have been more hints dropped in if he was going to structure it so far apart. Or, like, tell us when time passed that quickly. Because he didn't. It's told in 3 main parts, which is 2000, 2005, and 2009. And basically, it'll take place over the course of like a year, I think, ish. I was somewhat uncertain on all of that. But it just like followed his life during that year. And nothing really happened. Like, there was no plot. There was no interesting things going on. It was just his life and the ways in which he screwed it up, of which there were many. There were a great many. I felt like Ian McEwan had an interesting idea for a protagonist in this horrible, unlikable person, but then he couldn't think up a decent plot. Like, if that makes sense. Because I would have enjoyed this character being as awful and unlikable as he was if there was a really good plot behind him that I could get invested in, and that he could be sort of the antagonist to his own plot, in a way. And I feel like that could have been interesting, and that was kind of the effect that Ian McEwan was going for. But because there wasn't much of a plot, it was just following this really unlikable person as he did awful things, and treated everyone horribly, including himself, and I didn't care. That was the biggest problem, was that there was nothing I cared about in this book. I did read various things that said the protagonist was supposed to symbolize the way we treat global warming, because there's a lot about global warming and climate change in this, and that the way in which he was awful and lazy and like disregarded everyone's feelings was supposed to be representative of the world and politicians and how they treat global warming. Which could have been an interesting idea, but it didn't make this reading experience any better. I still was miserable during it. Like, even if that's an interesting concept, I still didn't like reading this book. I still didn't like following him around. Give him a better plot. Give him something for me to care about, and maybe I could have gotten behind that. The other thing I didn't really like was that Ian McEwan clearly did a lot of research for this. He clearly learned a great many things about global warming and climate change and solar energy and all of that. But he included it all in this book. Like, he felt the need to prove that he'd done research, or he didn't want all his research to go to waste. And the protagonist would give speeches, because he was a scientist, and he was a physicist and a Nobel Prize winner, so he would give speeches while, like, people would just hire him to give speeches about the topic. And those entire speeches, pages and pages of them, would be included in this book. And it got to the point where I just flipped through and like skimmed for any sort of narration because I didn't care about the science, you know? I was reading this, like, this is a fiction book. If I want to learn about global warming, I'll pick up a nonfiction science book on the topic, written by a scientist, not written by Ian McEwan. And it was boring to read, and there was so much information that really wasn't necessary for the story. That it was boring and dull, and I didn't care, and I feel like that a lot of that could have been edited out, except there wouldn't have been enough book without it. And it honestly felt like he was on a deadline and didn't have a plot and didn't have time to come up with one. I did not enjoy this. I really wish I'd read the Goodreads reviews first, but I don't like going in knowing what other people think in great detail. I'd rather form my own opinion. In this case, my opinion coincided with everyone else's opinion who also hated this book. So, I gave this 2 stars. I would not recommend reading it. It didn't ruin Ian McEwan for me. I do want to read more of his stuff. I would just possibly try to find more of his better books, because I've heard a great many good things, and this is the only book I've ever heard, like, terrible things about. So, I'm hoping he has better out there. Feel free to let me know down in the comments if you've read other Ian McEwans and if you like them. I did say that I've read Atonement, but it was so long ago that it didn't leave much of a lasting impact on me, and I don't remember liking it all that much. I don't recommend this book. You can do much better. You can probably do much better within Ian McEwan's books, should you desire it. That's gonna be it for me today. Bye, guys!